Hey, you're there. If you like the content I bring, your help is essential. For the channel to remain active and grow more and more, I need your support. Every new follower is a huge incentive to continue creating exciting stories and videos full of rides and trips. Also, by subscribing, you help me turn this passion into sustainable work, which allows me to offer you even more surprising content. As soon as you don't forget to subscribe, please like and share. Your participation makes everything different. Lorena grew up believing that the basis of life was the unconditional love of her family. An only child, raised with care by parents who said she was their greatest pride. She had always heard that unity was the Soares family's greatest asset. From an early age, Lorena showed her own brilliance, intelligent, determined, and charismatic. She built a digital marketing company on her own, which became a national reference. Still, everything she did was to make her family proud. At the age of 32, she finally decided to put an old plan into practice, to expand the business abroad. And to do so, she decided to share the management of the company with her cousin Alice, whom she considered like a sister. Lorena believed that this step would consolidate not only her success, but also the family's unity. What she didn't know was that, by opening this door, she would be handing her empire over to a serpent. While she celebrated her achievements, Alice silently traced her steps. With coldness, and behind the smiles and toasts, a plot was growing that would turn Lorena's life into a minefield. Alice had always been charming. She grew up in the shadow of Lorena's brilliance, but she learned to applaud her enthusiastically, or so it seemed. When Lorena invited her to take over as a director of the company, Alice cried with emotion, thanking her as if she had received a gift from heaven. But what Lorena didn't know was that Alice had been preparing for that moment for years. She had already studied the company's backstage, created discreet connections with suppliers and customers. The goal? To take control. Lorena, naive in the face of blood, didn't see the signs. Soon, Alice began making decisions without her knowledge, hiring people without consulting her, until she convinced Lorena that certain changes were strategic. And she believed her, because those who love each other never doubt. Meanwhile, documents were tampered with, partnerships were quietly dissolved, and secret accounts were opened with Lorena's name as a front. The scam was underway, and Lorena, busy with international expansion, didn't realize that her own house was falling apart. The trigger came on a Tuesday morning when Lorena was called to an extraordinary meeting with investors. Upon entering the room, she felt the air heavier than usual. Serious faces, eyes that did not meet hers. The legal director handed her an envelope. Inside there was a formal complaint. Tax fraud, embezzlement of funds and falsification of documents, all in the name of Lorena Soares. The world stopped. Her signature was on documents she had never seen. The accounts were in her name. Panic came before logic. But when she looked to the back of the room and saw Alice, serene, holding a cup of coffee as if nothing was happening, everything fell into place. The betrayal did not come from outside. It was there, smiling in the midst of the chaos. Lorena felt her heart drop, not only for the company, but for the destroyed bond. Alice had not only stolen what she had built, she had killed the most sacred thing: trust. The news spread like wildfire. In just a few days, Lorena's image was destroyed. Headlines called her a fraudster, former partners abandoned her. She tried to defend herself, but the more she spoke, the more she sank. The lawyers said that everything pointed to her. What no one saw was that Alice, a sneak, had already become the majority partner after convincing Lorena to sign a contractual amendment months earlier. The empire was now hers. Lorena was forced to step down, lost all access, and saw her name erased from the history of the company she created. What hurt the most was not the bankruptcy or the public humiliation. It was having been used by someone she called her sister. Locked up at home, Lorena spent days without eating, staring at the walls and trying to understand when she let her guard down so much. The life she had built was in ruins, and behind them, Alice's silent laughter echoed, now atop the throne she never built. Months passed. Lorena, now in silence, was slowly getting back on her feet, like someone picking up the pieces of a mirror that will never reflect the same face again. She lived in a simple apartment, far from the spotlight, luxury, and false adoration. It was in this emotional exile that she discovered her strength. She looked for traces, people who had been fired by Alice, loyal employees. She gathered evidence, looked through old accounts, meeting records, and the more she investigated, the clearer the web became. She discovered that Alice had the support of a corrupt former employee, a bribed accountant, and even one of the investors who had profited from her downfall. The betrayal was collective. But Lorena was no longer the woman who trusted blindly. Now she was driven by something new. Revenge. Not impulsive revenge, but the calculated, cold kind that only those who have died inside know how to prepare. War had been declared. Only this time, Lorena would choose the battlefield. The first move was strategic, to reconnect with old contacts, but with a new attitude. No sentimentalism. Lorena approached investigative journalists, shared anonymous documents, exposed the company's administrative flaws, filed complaints with concrete evidence, but always without signing anything. Alice's image, previously immaculate, began to crack. Small articles began to appear with discreet questions. Meanwhile, Lorena invested in her own name. She created a new consultancy, discreet but efficient, focused on female entrepreneurs. Success came quietly. It was like being reborn, but without applause, only with purpose. When Alice noticed the first damage to her reputation, it was too late. The press was starting to sniff out the rotten stuff. Lorena wasn't just looking for justice, she wanted Alice to feel what she felt. The slow, painful fall, the loss of admiration, the loneliness of the false top. A year after the scandal, Lorena was unrecognizable, stronger, colder, but with a sparkle in her eyes that no longer depended on the approval of others. Her consulting firm was already impacting hundreds of women, and even though she was not seeking fame, her name was once again circulating. And with it, the truth too. A leak of internal documents exposed Alice's manipulation. It was just the beginning. One of her accomplices, pressured by tax investigations, broke his silence and confessed everything. Lorena received the dossier on a rainy afternoon. She read it page by page without crying. The pain had already become a scar. It was time to act. She hired the best lawyers, filed criminal, civil, and labor lawsuits, and, contrary to what everyone expected, she appeared publicly. At a press conference, her firm voice echoed, "I was betrayed, but not defeated. Now I'm telling this story." The media, thirsty for redemption, embraced the narrative. Lorena was back, but not to start over. She came back to demand payment. Alice tried to respond. She denied everything. She said it was persecution, that Lorena was crazy. But the facts were undeniable. The statements, the recordings, the messages. Little by little, allies drifted away. The company, once vibrant, began to lose contracts, investors, and credibility. Alice was summoned to hearings, and with each statement, a layer of lies fell away. Lorena did not celebrate publicly. Her pleasure was internal. She watched everything without having to appear again. It was the truth speaking for itself. When the first sentence came down acknowledging the fraud and returning part of Lorena's assets, she just smiled. She knew the process would be long, but it was no longer about money. It was about honor. about proving that she was not the monster painted in the headlines. It was about showing that behind the bitterest disappointment, a strength is born that not even the most treacherous blood can extinguish. Little by little, justice was served. Alice lost the presidency of the company, had her assets frozen, and began to be investigated for other schemes. Lorena, in turn, refused offers to return to her old company. She was a different person now. She preferred freedom to the glory of a corrupt empire. She created a support network for women who had been betrayed by partners, associates, even their own family. In her lectures, she always repeated, "You can lose everything, but you should never lose yourself." The audience grew. The story of her downfall became a book. And one day, a former employee of Alice, crying at the end of a lecture, hugged her and said, "You saved me." Revenge, finally, became a legacy. Alice, now alone, lived surrounded by lawsuits and closed doors. She tried to appeal, tried to blame others, but to no avail. Her public image was destroyed. And Lorena? She felt no pity. She understood that forgiveness is not forgetting. It is liberation. The real right thing to do was not to see Alice suffer, but to understand that none of that defined her anymore. She was free. Free from guilt, from naivety, from the emotional ties that made her accept crumbs in the name of her family. Her new company was growing, but in an organic, healthy, and ethical way. She was now sleeping peacefully. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. An unexpected invitation arrived, an award for female entrepreneurship. Lorena almost refused. She no longer liked the spotlight. But something inside her told her to accept. She walked onto the stage elegantly, with her hair tied back and a firm gaze. When she took the microphone, she remained silent for a few seconds. The audience waited. Then she simply said, "Pain brought me here, and it was disappointment that taught me to choose who deserves to accompany me." Applause echoed. Tears flowed. She wasn't just talking about herself. She was talking about everyone who has ever trusted the wrong people. That night, Lorena wasn't just celebrating an award. She was celebrating her own transformation. The years passed. Lorena continued her life with ease and purpose. A new love appeared without haste. Someone who did not see her as a trophy but as a partner. She smiled sincerely again. Alice, on the other hand, faced justice. The last hearing was final. Conviction. When she heard the sentence, Lorena was not present. She was on a beach, barefoot, feeling the sun. Revenge, after all, had already been fulfilled inside her. One night, while going through old boxes of memories, Lorena found a photo. She and Alice laughing, hugging at the beginning of the company. For a moment, her heart sank, not with longing, but with understanding. The person who betrays someone is not always a complete monster. Sometimes they are just someone too weak to deal with their own envy. She kept the photo, not to remember the pain, but to never forget how far the illusion of blind affection can go. Pain teaches. And Lorena learned everything. Lorena's story became a reference. Business schools cited her case. Documentaries were produced, but she refused to be seen as a martyr. "I don't want to be remembered for the fall, but for what I did after it," she would say. Because Lorena's true triumph was not getting her money back, it was rebuilding herself. The woman who was born from ruin was much more powerful than the one who built that empire. One ordinary day, Lorena received a message. A young entrepreneur thanked her for her words in an old video. She said that, because of her, she had given up on suicide. Lorena cried. For the young woman's pain, for her own, for everything she had been through, for the chance to transform her pain into a bridge for others. And As she looked out the window, she whispered to herself, "I'm glad I survived that disappointment." Because in the end, what seemed like ruin was just the beginning of something bigger.